Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Nerd Shit. This is actually episode number 4. Thank you for making it this far. I've generated quite a few subscribers. Actually not that much, but more than what I had, so it's all good in the hood. So, if you've been following along, since the beginning, 3 episodes ago, that I try to take complex scientific principles, concepts, ideas, and just break them down into bite-sized pieces that people can understand. I am not speaking to the scientifically inclined audience because obviously people who have an academic background in any of the science, be it chemistry, physiology, athletic training, whatever, they're obviously going to look at this and be like, this guy's leaving a lot of stuff out. And the reason why I don't get into the nitty-gritty details of a lot of things is because I just feel it doesn't really give you much more application, going into the theoretical. Unless you actually plan on being a coach, unless you actually plan on using this, you don't need to understand it to that detail. However, you can understand it enough to where you could apply it to your own training and everything else, and, like I said, give you a good idea of where you should head. So, I'm going to talk about injuries today, but before that, I want to do a quick introduction of myself so you know why I'm talking about injuries. I am an athletic training student. For those that don't know what an athletic training is, we are health care providers. Similar to a physical therapist, but very different. We offer off the field and on field acute and long-term care. So say, for example, if a football player hits his head, we're going to run concussion protocols to see if there's any type of things going on by testing all 12 cranial nerves, or usually just a few, maybe not all 12. Wrap ankles, a lot of the things we do pre-game. We're also in charge of long-term care for athletes. So, say post-op athlete ACL reconstruction, we're going to basically get them from, right when they get off the surgery table back onto the field and everything else. So those are some of the responsibilities. So we have to be very steeped in physiology, neurology, rehabilitation, exercise, strength and conditioning, and various other things, because it's one thing to be able to take somebody from just a basic general injury and get him to normal activities of daily living, and it's another thing to take a high level professional athlete and get them to where they're back on the field and they're able to optimize their performance. So a lot of responsibility, it's very stressful, and there's a lot of things that you need to learn. And I feel that if we take a lot of the stuff that we have to learn in school and share that information with people, it can be very helpful, because there's a lot of things that most people are not aware of. So, we're going to talk about injuries, and we're going to talk about the most common injury, which are overuse injuries, are also known as repetitive strain injuries. And repetitive strain injuries and overuse injuries usually are the result from, you're doing something that to a certain magnitude that exceeds the tolerance of the tissue that you are placing under load. Now, understanding there's a lot of forces you can apply to tissues and different structures of the body, and we're going to adapt to it, granted that it's within, the limits of what we could actually handle. There's torsion, there's bending, there's compression, there's tension, so these are the various forces that the body could actually, come through. So what happens is repetitive strain injuries is that you're doing something, and let's say there's a microtrauma to a tissue. When those microtraumas occur within the tissue, its ability to bear load and its tissue tolerance, decreases. Not dramatically, but it decreases. And over time, these can lead to strains, these can lead to tears, so on and so forth. This isn't always the case. Sometimes, basically, you just go in there and you're an idiot and you just do something to such a degree that you literally just injure the tissue. This is usually where people are not very let's say smart with their rate progressions. So the type of injuries that actually occur to muscle tissues, there's a lot of injuries that could actually occur, but most of the time they're going to be tensile injuries. So this is basically the muscles are always kind of going through this tension approximation cycle, during movement. So basically during the eccentric contraction, there's tensile force going throughout the muscle, and then during the concentric contraction, there's approximation, where the muscles are basically, and the fibers are coming close together. So, when you get to a point where you're just placing it under so much tensile load that you cannot handle, a tear is almost imminent in most cases, and in the best case scenario, just a strain. best case scenario, grade 1 strain. So now that we got that out of the where we're kind of talking about the mechanisms of injury, and that was a very, very simplistic overview of it too. Trust me, I know there's an athletic training professor out there be like, you motherfucker, you left out so much shit. You could have said this, you could have said that, you could have said this. Like, just to kind of do diligence, sometimes you do things in a way too that are different than what you normally do. And in these, let's say for example, like positional weakness, let's say you're bench pressing and you're going a little wider, so you might be able to handle it. Your pecs, your anterior deltoid, and your bicep might be able to actually handle the range of motions you were doing before, but you go into a position of weakness because one, you just don't train it. Two, your range of motion and mobility around your shoulder just might not be that great. And, you know, obviously it'd be good whenever you're doing anything different to probably go a little bit lighter that day, relatively speaking. And when you do this, what will happen is you basically put yourself in a position where, you know, an injury will occur. This happens when people are running and they get into positions they're not accustomed to, and they can't withstand the force. Like I said, tissues fail under load. You get to a position and you put enough load on it and the tissue fails, this is what really will create that injury. So what do? Well, the first thing you have to understand is that you have now entered what is called a cycle, more specifically the pain spasm cycle or the injury cycle. Now there's 3 phases to this cycle. There's the acute inflammatory phase, there's the fibroblastic repair phase, and then there's the maturation-remodeling phase. Each phase has very distinct goals that have to occur in order for complete healing, you know, to happen. And what a lot of us do is we interfere with this, you know, process as much as possible. You know, it says very explicitly in my athletic training manual, there's not a lot of things that we can do to speed up the healing process. We just want to accommodate the healing process. However, there's a lot of things that we can do to impede healing, and that's why having an awareness and recognizing what stage of healing an athlete is in is so important. So, in the acute inflammatory phase, usually what you'll have is decreased motor function. Well, obviously this is decreased range of motion, decreased strength, you know, things like that. You'll have pain. You'll have spot tenderness, like you can actually palpate it and, you know, create pain within the muscle. You'll have redness. You'll have swelling. You know, you might have edema or discoloration, things going on like that. So those are the signs and symptoms that you are now in the acute inflammatory phase. What do? Well, number one, you don't interfere with it. Pain management is crucial in this area. So anything that you can do, if the pain is such to a great degree that you cannot tolerate it, it's not outside the realm to take an NSAID or things like that to modulate pain in the acute phases. I don't recommend taking them more than 2 to 3 days. Like I said, it's just pain management. And I know people are out there, those interfere with the healing process, this, and that. I get that. But you also know what also interferes with the healing process? Not being able to sleep, high levels of stress, decreased motor function, not being able to actually move. All these things also interfere. So you just kind of have to weigh it out, like what's better, getting 8 hours of sleep by, you know, sort of anesthetizing yourself with NSAIDs, or just saying, hey, I'm just going to leave it even though I'm in pain and I'm only getting 2 hours of sleep a night, I'm stressed out, I can't function, and all these other things. So ice is also good, but ice, we also have to understand, has also have a bad reputation right now, undeservingly, because it does have utility. If the pain is so great that you can't handle it and you want to forego NSAIDs, you can use pain because it does have profound analgesic effects. What does that mean? It actually helps block pain, which is a good thing, and you can use it throughout the day. It's free. The problem with ice is in its application, or more specifically, its over-application, because when you use it for a long duration and too frequently, what happens is the cells will start to swell and they're kind of start to leak and everything else. And we don't want that. We want that sort of plug and everything to happen as we enter into the second phase of healing. And we can definitely interfere with this. So, pain management is going to be number one in the acute phase. You can do some light movements, exercise, but I do recommend you exercise. So let's say you injure your shoulder, you can still do a bike and everything else. Maintaining your cardiorespiratory fitness and physical activity is good. You can also work out the other arm because there's this thing called the crossover effect, where if you train the uninjured limb, it'll actually decrease the amount of loss of function on the other side. So just something to keep in mind. However, how this phase has very distinct goals, which is basically like a wound, to clean it, to heal it, to get it set up so new tissue can start to be formed, which is when we enter the second phase of healing, which is the Fibroblastic-Repair Phase. So the first phase can last anywhere from 72 hours to 6 days. It tends to be a lot longer for a lot of people because we're very stubborn, because they'll just keep hammering away, especially if the injury is not to the extent to where they have to stop doing what they're doing. They're just going to keep doing what they're doing. So once you enter the fibroblastic repair phase, this is where you can start to be a lot more aggressive with your training and things like that. But most importantly, let pain be your guide. Don't do things with loads that trigger pain. Don't do things to range of motions that create pain and all these other things. But the things that we really want to avoid in this is this fear avoidant attitude towards exercise. We want to develop what's called movement confidence. That's where we can start to gradually introduce load and everything else to get into these range of motions. Same rules apply. Pain management, you can use like ultrasound, a TENS unit. Still, you can use ice, you can use heat, gentle ranges of motion, and things like that. The reason why we want to start exercising in this phase of healing is due to Wolff's Law, that things heal due to the tensile loads that they're basically mechanically strained in. So if, with scar formation and everything else, if your muscle basically runs this direction, we basically want to tense it in this direction so it will heal in this direction. That is such a poor explanation of it. I'm sorry to any of my professors watching this video, but basically that's the simplistic overview of it. This phase could last anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks, and by the time you get out of this phase, you'll enter what's known as the Maturation-Remodeling Phase. As basically the name says, maturation remodeling. The new tissue has been laid down. The fibroblastic repair phase has done what it's done, which basically laid down the ground substance and everything else for that new tissue to grow. And now it's going to mature and remodel to basically to the way it was before. So new tissue has formed, and now it's going to mature, get stronger, and everything else. Pain is usually not present in this phase of healing. So, but like as with the other phases, let pain be your guide. But you can be a lot more aggressive in this phase of healing. And this is the type of phase where you can start to introduce what we call in our field functional testing. And functional testing allows us to have these regimented and controlled ways in which we can test the tissues that are injured to see how ready they are for physical activity. They're usually going to use very minimal load, very minimal range of motion, but basically like we're going to test maybe the endurance quality of it, the mobility, and all these other things. And you also could have other proxies as well, like pain-free range of motion and various other things. During the maturation remodeling phase, because pain is not present, this is not the time to really start loading those tissues as much as you can, because what people don't realize, this is where you're most prone towards injury, because like I said, it needs to mature. It's not mature yet. So you're at the greatest risk for a re-injury, also because there's no pain present, so there's really nothing stopping you from loading a tissue to the point where you just kind of mess yourself up. And I see this happen time and time again with recreational weight trainees, bodybuilders, so on and so forth. They think they're out of the woods because the pain is gone all of a sudden, the wheels fall off the bus and they're back to square one, So these are the type of things that we want to look at as well. So you have to understand that every injury has its own timeline. The time it takes an injury to heal really is dictated by the extent and the severity of the injury. Obviously, a grade 1 strain will heal much more quickly than a grade 3. Anything that requires surgery, you're looking at definitely a decent amount of rehab time, anywhere from 6 months to a year, to have like full regain of function, motor function, strength, and everything else. But there's things that you can do to avoid this. So how do you basically avoid injuries? Well, number one, there's really nothing you can do to 100% avoid injury, but you have to understand that your body is this organism that adapts to the stresses that you place upon it. So one of the best things that I could say is be very sensible with your load progressions, because if you're, let's say for example, benching 260 pounds and 260 feels good, and you jump to 290, your risk of injury goes up, especially if you never lifted 290 before. You have to understand your tissues are not accustomed to that load. So you don't know whether or not they're going to fail under that load. And if you know that 260 is the heaviest ever gone, 265 is still a PR, 270 is still a PR. I don't know why you're going up to 290, and if you're really aggressive, you're like, I just want to bench 3 plates, and then you go up to 315, and then you get stapled to the bench, and you wonder why your pecs hurt all the time, and your anterior shoulder hurts all the time. So, you know, being very sensible with your load progressions. How about number 2? Making sure that you are choosing your exercises in a very efficient but also like productive manner. So don't just train chest. Don't forget about all these muscles we have here on the back and everything else as well, because your joints work in a force couple, and everything, you know, in your body works in sort of this balanced way, you know, this antagonist-agonist relationship. So if all you ever do is train your chest and you don't train the muscles on the posterior, you might run into some postural issues, which will negatively affect your technique, which probably will put you in bad positions when you're actually, you know, performing exercises. You can have weaknesses in stabilizers, you can have a loss of mobility, all these other things. So just make sure that you have a very balanced training program. Number 3, train with a full range of motion. Now this is relative. Everybody's full range of motion is going to be entirely different. You know, where you stop on the bench press is actually totally anthropometric and goal dependent. So anthropometric means the limitations of what your actual skeleton will let you. The skeleton, the muscles, and the ligaments. The ligaments are what tell the, you know, joint where to start and stop, but the muscles also act as a brake as well. And because the muscles are neurologically innervated, sometimes there's the brain involved. The brain's like, nope. And that's when we get into the proprioceptors, like the Golgi tendon organs and the muscle spindles. However, just make sure that you are training within your anthropometric limitations. Don't go beyond that. And a lot of that is just, you know, obviously having experience in the gym, knowing what you can and can't do, and how much, you know, range of motion you actually have. So training with a full range of motion is, you know, very important. Another reason why is because you actually build flexibility under load. So like you literally will start to develop flexibility to actually do things under load if you train with a full range of motion. This leads to more even forces around the joint, more even forces distributed throughout the muscle and everything else. Number 4, really emphasize an eccentric contraction, even some pauses. And I know this is kind of like out there, but here's the thing, hear me out. When we do things in a ballistic manner, like we just bounce up and down out of the squat, there's this thing called the stretch reflex. And there's a reason why people bounce and do those things, because you're basically using the stored elastic energy within the musculotendinous unit to create sort of like this overforce contraction, which is much more powerful than what the muscle can create. And obviously you'll jump higher, you'll get more explosive and things like that. With an eccentric contraction, what happens is the forces around the tendon will start to dissipate, and you'll actually use more and more of the muscle belly for the exercises. This is even more so when you utilize a pause in the end range of motion, like anywhere from 1 to 3 seconds will totally dissipate any stretch reflex that's going to happen, and you'll totally take out the the stretch shortening cycle of that tendon. So make sure that you are utilizing some form of tempo system. I recommend 3 seconds for every exercise. If the range of motion is very short, like on a leg extension or a leg press, maybe not so much, but you know, these are going to be the, you know, key details. Lastly, be very cognizant and smart with how many days you're actually training hard. Now, I'm going to sound like a dick here, and I'm just going to say it. Most of you don't train hard. You don't train hard as you think you do. Most people who train with me puke during the first session, and I don't say that to like, or cry, but I don't say that as like a badge of honor or things like that, but it's the truth. Most people don't know what hard training is. They go in and they do their stupid booty pumps and all their little pauses and their pulses and all these things and all, you know, their heart rate's up and stuff, but you put them in there and you put them through an honest to goodness, like real weight training session, and they're literally like tapping out within 30 minutes. So, you have like, you know, needless to say, like most people don't know what hard training actually is, you know, and that's not me trying to sound pretentious, it's just the truth. But I digress. If you are training hard, you have to make sure that you allocate enough recovery time between training sessions so those tissues can fully heal. This is going back to like the beginning of the video when we're talking about the, you know, the phases of healing, you're basically in the phases of healing, you're basically creating trauma within the muscle that it needs to heal from, for like stem cell proliferation and all those other things, muscle biogenesis. So, you basically need, get your muscles stronger and bigger. And if you're training chest, like say 4 days a week, well, I would argue that you're not training your chest that hard, but I would also argue that you're creating a lot of repetitive stress and overtraining on those tissues, and this will inevitably lead to an injury. So, anywhere from 1 to 2 times a week is sufficient for most people. I would give yourself 72 hours at minimum between a session where you're training that muscle group. So for example, if I'm training chest, let's say on Monday, I probably won't train that muscle again until Thursday or Friday. And obviously I may do it in a very practical way. I'm not going to do the same exercises and things like that. But the idea here is I'm giving myself enough recovery. Some muscles create so much systemic fatigue that it literally takes you a week to recover from. And this is more so the stronger you get. And this is like for me with lower body, I can only train my lower body once a week. If I train my lower body once a week, I'm fucked until next week, until I'm unfucked, and then I can go ahead and fuck myself again. But anyways, that's the biggest thing. Make sure you're giving yourself enough recovery time. And pay attention to the signs if you actually are starting to overreach. Not necessarily overtrain, but overreach. Decreased motivation to train, decreased strength, decreased recovery time, loss of appetite. All these other things are signs of overreaching. So you might be overdoing it in the gym or just not giving yourself enough time to recover. But anyways, those are injuries and everything else. I know I was going to talk about my lower back injury. I'll actually save that for another video when I talk about what I did specifically to heal it, and I'll make it a 2-part video where I go into what I do to maintain my lower back health and strength, where I list off every single exercise that I do. But anyways, this was the video. Hope everyone enjoyed it. Take care and have a great day. Oh, like and subscribe.